The following is an interview with David Sutcliffe, Hollywood actor turned somatic therapist, best known for his viral interview with Andrew Tate.
I think he's a sweetie pie.
We dive into that conversation, his views on the future of therapy culture, and much more. Enjoy the show. It's a pleasure to meet you. I guess the first thing I'd love you to explain is what is somatic therapy and why is it better than psychotherapy?
It is better, I think. I was in traditional psychotherapy for many years, and I always say it was effective in helping me understand kind of the math of my problem, meaning things happened to me in my childhood. It had an impact on me, on my belief systems, on my attitude towards life, and how I saw myself, how I saw the world, and that had ramifications in the decisions that I was making and in my life. It impacted my life, and that was great to understand, obviously, because things started to make sense for me, why I was the way I was and thought the way that I thought and getting the results that I was getting and all of that. But I wasn't feeling anything, and I knew that I needed to feel. For some reason, I had to instinct, like there were emotions inside me and that they needed to be released and expressed for me to kind of make myself whole again. And so I found this therapy, somatic therapy, core energetics, and somatic, the word of the body. And so core energetics uses different physical techniques like hitting, punching, kicking, breath work, different stress positions to help you feel the feelings that are held in the body, stuck in the body. And so the concept is that when we experience trauma as children, not only is there a kind of cognitive distortions are created, but there are muscular armoring also happens as an adaptive response to it. In other words, we're overwhelmed with feeling. And so we hold ourselves in different ways to prohibit ourselves from feeling in order to keep ourselves safe. And so core energetics and other somatic therapies and approaches, the intention really is to go in through the body and help people feel the feelings that are held there or frozen there, release them, and be able to feel them in present time, so not disassociated. And even better is if you're witnessed. So that's why group work can be so powerful, or something about letting out your rage or being witnessed in your grief. That is, for me, is deeply healing, because of course we have a lot of shame about our feelings, whether we're conscious of it or not. That's part of the defense that gets created. And so that also helps being witnessed release ourselves from the shame.
So it sounds like there's a few different components there. There's the being witnessed, which seems to be a key part, and kind of going through the body, maybe perhaps more than getting stuck in the story level of things, like the intellect. And then also, I guess, processing things physically. So why is it that you think it's difficult for people to experience their feelings through their body without those sort of three pillars being in place? Why can't I just right now, I feel like in the moment, a little tension in my stomach, I'm a little nervous. Why do I sort of feel these things? Or why do I need these different processes to help me to come into more fullness of being?
Because feelings take us out of control. And people don't like to be out of control. It doesn't feel safe to be out of control. We've been conditioned in some way, all of us, to repress our feelings. Not just things like anger or fear or sadness, but also our love or our ambition, or we reach for something, for what we want, and we get judged or shamed for it, so we stop reaching. And we have the impulse to reach, but we stop it, right? And we literally will kind of stop it in the body. And then we'll tell ourselves a story that it's not okay to go after what you want. It's bad. Only bad people go after what they want. We rationalize it in some way. So yeah, you're exactly what you said. You're working with all these layers of, essentially it's defense. But feeling is, it's scary. It's scary to feel our feelings, as I said, because it takes you out of control, but also because we've learned that it's not safe to feel. There's a reason that we repressed our feelings in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
We got a message from the environment that those feelings are not okay. And because the child's imperative is to stay connected and in favor with the caregiver, which makes sense if you're a vulnerable, helpless child, you can't take care of yourself. Your priority is to make sure that that person who is taking care of you is, that you're good with them and they're paying attention to you and that they like you.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to suppress anything, any feelings, any emotions, any impulses that you determine that they don't like, that threaten the connection.
Right.
And since all human beings have biases, conscious and unconscious, we're always adapting ourselves to meet their demands. And the process of that is emotional and psychological repression. And so to the child, inviting back those feelings, those emotions, those impulses, to the child's mind feels dangerous. Now, a rational mind might say, well, there's no problem. You can come in this room and you can get your anger out. But the child, it feels like, well, no, that's a threat to my survival. If people see this part of me, I'm going to be alienated. I'm going to be shamed. I'm going to be judged, and I can't risk being alone. I can't risk that, and I won't risk that. The child couldn't risk that. And so really the process that I'm taking people through is, are you willing to say yes to all of what's inside of you? Be willing to bring it out, to express it, to allow it to be witnessed? Or will you continue to repress your feelings, repress your instincts, betray yourself in some way in order to keep up this illusion of connection with other people? That's what we had to do as children. And now that's usually what we do as adults. And the truth is, when we're all the way who we are, let's say, that's incredibly attractive. So we actually, when we're fully expressed, fully realize authentically ourselves, even if lots of people don't like us, right? I mean, why do people love Trump? Well, I would argue that he's authentic to himself. And that is repulsive for a lot of people, but it's also very attractive to a lot of people. And we like people that are authentic to themselves. They impact us and they give permission. And so that's really you're working with that bind that people have that got established when they were children. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I guess I'm kind of interested in sort of not pushing back exactly, but just trying to provide some sort of duality to this, because I think what a critic of therapy would say, and what I sometimes come up with rationally, is like, well, sure, like we have these binds as children. Like I can't, for example, get very, very angry in front of my mother, because then that's going to create an alienation and I'm not going to get the care that I need. So I might suppress that. But similarly, if I go out into an environment like in public and become very, very angry, then I'm also going to be judged in that way too. So there is a kind of element of having to learn to suppress our authenticity in order to adapt to society. And to the extent that our caregivers are proxies for how we'll grow up as adults, I think there's a kind of argument. I mean, you brought up Donald Trump as well. Like somebody like Donald Trump, I think, like I can understand what you're saying about that attraction to like the authentic figure. To the degree that that's true, I don't really have a comment, but you can certainly say it's also a very kind of risky thing to do, because if you present yourself authentically, and I can think of examples of this in my own life, where it can go like well, or it can go badly. Whereas if I suppress myself, then, it's probably not going to be a disaster. Like I might live in this kind of glass half full, half empty kind of way, but I'm just going to be kind of plodding along, and maybe my life's going to be okay. Like I think that
you made my argument. Do you want to be plodding along in your life to just be okay, or do you want to risk being hated and being true to yourself?
I honestly think it depends on the situation. I mean, we can get into specifics later, but it's just something that I've observed in. Well, maybe we can sort of tie it into.
Of course, I understand what you're saying. Like, when I say, be authentic to yourself, I'm not saying that you go out and you just express yourself all the time, whatever you want, whenever you want. We live in a society and we have to be mindful, and we should be strategic about, how we show up in the world. The difference is, are you doing it consciously? Are you actually making a decision? So if you had to repress your anger to stay in the good graces of your mother, then you might tell yourself a story that your anger is bad. Right? It's not okay to be angry. Well, that's not true. Your anger is just an expression.
Sure.
And oftentimes it's a completely reasonable expression based on the circumstance. If somebody is violating your boundary repeatedly, you have a right to get angry, and that anger actually may be the thing necessary to set the boundary. It can be self-affirming, so you want to have access to that. Or if you have a belief that it's bad, then that's going to create problems for you. You're going to get, people can take advantage of you. This is one example.
The way that I like to think about it, and tell me what you think about this, is like, spiritually, psychologically, however you want to put it, like I have all these different, like a house with like all these different rooms. And some of these rooms I've never been in. I don't even know that they're there. Like there might be like an anger, right? And if I go into that room and I feel that anger fully, like we're using anger as an example, but it could be anything. It could be stuff to do with sexuality or shame or guilt and all of these different disowned parts. If I can go in and sort of shine light into that room and kind of dust it out and inhabit it, then it's something that I have access to in my life. I'm not kind of expending energy trying to keep this door closed and hold this energy down. So I do get what you're saying. I'm just trying to sort of provide some counterpoints as well, because I think that like one of the things that is tricky about therapy culture, like in the broader society at the moment, is there's this sort of idea that it's all about venting your spleen, and you've got to be crying or be vulnerable, and these things are like somehow inherently good, but there's definitely some nuance there, isn't there, about like how, like for example, in the therapeutic environment, the fourth pillar I would say is confidentiality. And you may not agree with this, but like let's say for example that we were in a therapy session or it was a group work session and I was sharing something very vulnerable. Part of my capacity to be able to do that would be a feeling of safety and a kind of container for that experience, and the knowledge that I wasn't going to be judged, like the whole, is it Carl Rogers, like the unconditional positive regard kind of idea. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, because I think part of your work, from what I can perceive, is doing these like live therapy sessions, and I'd love to get into that like dynamic of how, obviously with your background as being an actor, like does that change the nature of how your clients are? Is it a therapy session? Is it like some kind of performance entertainment product? Like, talk to me about that.
Well, 95% of the work that I do is with clients or groups in private and, that are confidential. Obviously, when I, put a camera on it, it does change it. And people have to agree to that. That said, what I will say is, in my experience, because I've recorded a number of workshops, did a whole documentary and a week-long group therapy retreat with my teacher, a woman named Ann Bradney, and I found that the cameras were really just served as another witness, and in fact helped the work, because it created an urgency. And as somebody who's an actor, there's something about a camera when it's looking at you, you, you can't fool it. I can fool a room of 20 people. I can
Oh, yeah.
convince them. Well, most of us can. We do it all the time. Right? You can, or at least you can at least put them off or distract them in a certain way. And maybe they don't, maybe they know they're being fooled, but they're not entirely conscious of it.
And they're sort of bought in as well to an extent. I think people like
Yeah,
being
exactly.
fooled to a degree.
But the camera has this kind of knowing gaze, and you can feel, I can't lie. So it actually creates, I think, an urgency and takes the work in some ways deeper. Now, people will avoid certain things, like if somebody was having an affair, they're not going to bring that out in the group, or they feel a little bit protective of their parents, so they may not talk about things directly. But that's okay. The story isn't really that important.
Sure.
But I the therapeutic process is really interesting. It's very dynamic. And so I made the decision to record it. It was this back in 2008. And now we see, shows like couples therapy, which is really successful. And obviously I've interviewed a number of people that are in pseudo therapy sessions online. And I always, you are playing with fire a little bit. Like there is an integrity issue. And I feel very protective of all the people that I'm talking to. Like I don't want to exploit them. And I guess the feedback that I've received is everybody that I interviewed in that way, they love it. They're super happy at the end of the interview, and they're proud of what transpired. And even though it's vulnerable, and my belief is that it's because people want to be seen. They actually want to be seen in their most authentic self. And if they feel that there's a well-intentioned facilitator, therapist, and who's also conducting the filming of it, that they appreciate that. It's a kind of it's a creative act in a way. And that's how I see it. I think therapy is it's a healing process, but it's also a creative process. There's an art to it. And demonstrating that art on film, I think is interesting.
So let's take you into this moment then with a client. Let's say it's being filmed. Let's say it's a private client, somebody that you're working with that won't be seen in public. Like in that moment of that creative process, if it's going well, what are you feeling in your body? What are you noticing? What gives you that sense that you're on track with something? Because obviously I've seen you work in some of your interviews, but I'm very curious from like an internal point of view. How do you navigate that? Because I find it fascinating to watch.
It's a great question. It's how do I answer that? It's really an intuitive thing. As you said, unconditional positive regard is where you start. You just have to be in acceptance of everything. You have to demonstrate curiosity. They have to feel that you're not judging them in any way. You're just trying to get and to have a kind of an intention without demand. That's the main thing. There could be no demand or expectation put on the client. As soon as you put a demand on it, they feel it and they retract. So you have to have this energy, like nothing has to happen here. We don't have to get anywhere. We don't have to go anywhere. It's like we're just having a conversation. I'm just curious. But ultimately what I'm trying to do is, first primarily create a kind of psychological, emotional safety for them. So they feel held, they feel seen, they feel recognized, they feel like everything's okay. And then usually what happens then is they'll reveal something, they'll say something, or they'll talk about something. And there's something in what they say that that is a key to it's a key to something deeper. So if I can pick up on it and just like lock that in, right? And then I start asking questions around that.
Mm-hmm.
And usually whatever's there is something that they unconsciously are trying to avoid. But there's another part of them that actually wants it to be liberated. There's always this tension between our higher and lower self. The higher self wants liberation, wants it to be seen, right? Wants to be free of this thing. But the lower self, which is really, the shame part of us, the fear part of us, is kind of, wants to keep it down, wants to keep it in the shadows because it's afraid of what's going to happen if it's revealed. So I'm always negotiating with the lower self part of them, and
Visitating it
in some way, yeah, and then trying to essentially box them in, ask them a series of questions where there's kind of nowhere else they can go. And then all on the simplest level, I'm just trying to help them get present to whatever it is they're feeling. So for instance, I had a client yesterday who, it's a typical situation. He had all these experiences in childhood, and he was telling me about them, and they sounded really scary to me. And most of us are generally disassociated from those feelings of fear that we experience as children. We forget what it's like to be a helpless infant or a very tiny 4-year-old and what life is like. It's fucking scary, especially if our parents are not attuned to us, or our dad or our mother are angry, perhaps abusive. Like, we forget, we must disassociate from that fear. And so all I'm trying to do is like get him to come present with that fear, like with that little boy and their fear, so that he can touch into it, so he can remember himself there, so he can come into the reality of what that experience was like for him, which he doesn't want to feel because there's a reason he disassociated from it, right? It wasn't safe. But the problem is that repressed fear is causing him all kinds of problems in his life as an adult. And so the way out of the fear is to go into the fear. And so in some level, all I'm helping people do is just get present with whatever it is they're feeling, which sounds simple, but we have a lot of resistance to it.
You said a lot of things there that I really like. I mean, I didn't mention this at all, but I have also some experience working with people, and I have a license as a counselor. And one of the reasons why I was so drawn to your work and the way that you describe things is very much, I hate the word resonates, but it does. It resonates with the way that I like to work with people, and also how I like to be worked on, if that is a way of putting it. And the thing you said there that I wanted to bring to a specific example was about not wanting to change somebody. And you did that very famous interview with Andrew Tate, which I'm sure you've spoken a lot about. And I watched both of them. I watched the first one you did and the second one, and it was, on many levels, it's interesting to see like his evolution, but maybe also to an extent you can tell about your evolution between those two interviews. I think they were about 4 years apart. And are you frozen? Oh, you're still there. And when you were describing this process of like boxing the person in, it reminded me of how in that second interview, it was like it almost felt like for the first like 3/4 of the interview, he was approaching it like a kickboxer, like coming into the ring. He's got his audience, and he's like almost not like going to battle, but it's kind of like a bit of I don't want to put like labels on it, like a performance or routine, but I did honestly get this sense of like, but what about this? But what about this? But don't you see it this way? Don't you see it this way? And the moment that I felt like it really shifted was when you started talking about presence, and he sort of had this admission, or I don't know what to call it really, but that like he wasn't really present in the moment. And that was like a place where you connected. And I felt like after that moment, it came very late on. It was like he suddenly became a lot more likable as a person, because I could see that there was some like openness there, like a sort of childlike curiosity. And I was like, oh, this person is perhaps a lot more likable. And it made me feel of like how stressful it must be potentially, or how limiting it must be to be constantly judged by the public. I'm not really entirely sure where I'm getting at with this, but Yeah, maybe you could just maybe speak a little bit about that, like the presence piece.
Yeah. No, I think those are great observations. Uh, I love Andrew. I think he's a sweetie pie. I think he's, you know, and I felt that in the first interview. Like he's very, very playful, and I felt his heart, and I felt he's a good dude. I mean, he's got his stuff like we all do, and he's got a particular set of uh, gifts and a very strong personality. And I think he's playing his role marvelously in the culture. Um, so I don't judge him. In terms of his legal issues, I don't know about that. I guess we'll see. But just in terms of my interactions with him, I quite, I'm quite fond of him. So I guess I want to say that up front. Yeah, he's like we all do. He has a defense. He has a kind of an idealized self-image, just as I do now. I'm presenting myself a certain kind of way, and his idealized self-image comes a lot around power, and it's given him a lot, right? It's gotten him everything that he wanted in his life, and in a way, that's how he had to adapt to survive his childhood, based on his relationship with his father, like be powerful. And it's worked for him. And I can appreciate that. The point that I was trying to make to him was that is a magnificent tool that you've developed, but there's other tools in your toolkit. And the cost of constantly having to be powerful and to be aggressive and to be assertive and to be essentially conquering life is that you are disassociated from your beingness, right? Your stillness, your presence. And that I was trying to make the argument that if you can have both things at the same time, like you can bring this other, you might call it a feminine part of you, the beingness part of you, like into presence. But again, as I was saying earlier, it doesn't feel safe for him to do that. It's not safe for him. Like power is where he feels safe. And so I'm actually asking him to do something that to the child is terrifying, to come all the way present with what he's feeling. He doesn't know what's going to happen. He's out of control. And that's what happens in that moment at the end when he really comes present is like there's a moment where he's like, he lets down the defense, he lets down the mask, and something else comes through. And it's like I saw it, and it was extremely powerful. And as I say to people, if that was our first session with any client, I would have been very happy with it.
If that was not a film session, what do you think, if anything, would have been different?
Well, it's a film session. He has legal issues at the time. I mean, obviously he has to be careful about. Both of us have to be careful about what we're saying. Probably. I mean, every session is context dependent, right? So if he was actually calling me up and saying, hey, I need some help, I need some therapy, that is a very specific kind of dynamic. And I probably would have been a little more assertive because the invitation to be assertive would have been there because he's asking for help. And I would have been a little bit more direct about telling him what I thought and what he needed to do about it. But in this dynamic, it's really it is a cat and mouse game. It's a chess match, right? I'm a psychotherapist. He doesn't believe in psychotherapy. So here we go. And we're going to talk to each other and we're going to see what happens. And so it was a scene, really. I mean, that interview is more like a scene that we're playing. Mm-hmm. I think Andrew and I are very good scene partners together. There's a kind of chemistry we enjoy each other, we appreciate each other, we give each other enough room and give each other like our due, because otherwise, like you to make it interesting, right? Like he gave me a lot of openings. There was things that he said that I was very surprised that he said, like when I asked him if his father was present for him, and he said no. Well, he'd defended his father previously in that interview and giving me nothing. And then all of a sudden he was like, my father wasn't present for me. So he knows that that's an opening, right? So why is he doing that? Because if he doesn't give me something, the interview is not interesting. There's nothing there. And so he knows he's got to open up and be honest. He knows, like, for the thing that we're creating together, like that there has to be some kind of tension. Like he has to give me something. And so in that sense, that interview it's real, it's authentic. Like there's nothing scripted. It's an improvisation in real time, but it's also on some level, we know that cameras are there. It's a performance. Can't not be. And that's okay. That doesn't detract from it. It just, that's what that particular thing was.
I guess it makes it it's almost like a new genre, isn't it?
That's what I think. Yeah. I when I saw it for the first time, I thought that's all. Yeah, it's a new genre. That's exactly what I thought. So my wife thought too. She's like, that's like not like anything else that I've ever seen before. It's something entirely new.
So, again, just to, I guess, push back a little bit, or just kind of think about this from another angle. I think one of the reasons why you were able to get to that point at the end of that interview was that you had spent this whole period building up rapport. And I could tell that you, like you say, you had great chemistry, and I could tell that he respects you. I don't know if that's an assumption. I obviously can't speak to people's inner experience, but that's the impression that I got. And so that he was able to open up to you in that way. But in the course of the conversation, I really noticed some weird things that he said, like contradictions, or I think he said at one point, might is right, and women should obey men, and all this kind of stuff. And I can understand how in a private therapeutic environment, there can be this unconditional positive regard. But do you feel to an extent that when something's going to be publicly consumed, there's a responsibility to like push back on things or hold people accountable to their actions or things that they say? Or is it okay to just basically give somebody kind of carte blanche to express anything that they want to say?
My personal opinion is I'm under no obligation or responsibility to push back on anything anybody says. Like I'm just there to understand how and what they think, and the audience can decide what they think about that. So I'm as a psychotherapist, as an interviewer, that's my philosophy, and so I'm not really placing any moral judgments on the people that I'm talking to. I am trying to point out contradictions, in their thinking, but in terms of, I interviewed, what the hell's her name? Why am I blanking on her name? The woman who says women, they shouldn't vote.
Oh yeah, I know the one you mean.
Pearl Davis.
Pearl, yeah.
Yeah. She makes a compelling argument. If you actually listen to her argument, it's like, it's not an unreasonable argument.
It's coherent.
It's coherent. Yeah. And it's like, so if you react to like, oh, women shouldn't vote, what the fuck are you talking about, Pearl? You're not getting anywhere. I think the more interesting thing is like, okay, that's interesting. Why do you think that? What is your argument? Like, sell me on that idea. And then, you give the person the space to really like talk it through. And if I see contradictions in the argument, I'm going to point them out, just like I would any argument, but I'm not going to make a moral judgment on it. I don't actually find that interesting. I thought on the trigonometry podcast, like they spent 10 minutes railing on Pearl for interviewing or having somebody on her show, somebody controversial on her show, forget the dude's name. And I was like holding her responsible. Like, you should have pushed back. You should have said this. You should have said that. And she was just like, why? Like, that's not how I do it. And I found it odd that they were so insistent that person should have been they should pass moral judgment on them. I don't get that.
Yeah, I guess I see both sides to it. I think on the one hand, because of your non-judgmental position, you're able to get perhaps to a deeper level than other people are able to, because as we know, as soon as you cast judgment on somebody, it immediately puts them on the defensive, and you're never going to get beyond that. But then you're also, I think, like, we live in a judgmental culture.
Yeah.
A lot of online content feeds off judgment, projection, sort of like objects, like building people up, then tearing them down. I mean, we can talk about that. But if you are providing a podcast to somebody, like an entertainment product, you're also giving them a platform basically to promote themselves. And so to an extent, you're tacitly endorsing what they say if you're not pushing back on it. To an extent, I'm just trying to present the argument. I understand that you don't agree with me, but that's what somebody would say.
Well, I think you have to present a pushback on the contradictions in their argument. That's all.
Would there be anybody that you would refuse to interview?
No. I would interview anybody. And I would interview them the same way that I would interview Tate or Pearl or whoever, or you. Hitler, it doesn't matter. I'm not, listen, I'm interested in what Rumi calls the field beyond right and wrong. And I think the world needs bad guys. I think the light and the dark is one thing. And there is no light without the dark. There is no good without evil. There is no God without the devil. We live in the contrast. And my philosophy is personally, and in my work, and then in work as a therapist, but also in my work as a content creator, is I want to know the shadow inside myself and inside other people without judgment, without any need to overcome it necessarily. I don't think it's something that can be overcome. I think humans have an evil that lives inside them that is always latent. And maybe it's not as latent as we think. It comes out in all kinds of ways. In our personal relationships, we can be cruel. Me and my wife are cruel to each other frequently, and because we're activated, because we're defended, because we're human, it's what it is. And yeah, we're not beating each other. But sometimes we get in a fight and we say mean things and we're not our best self. And it's just a defense, right? It's not like I'm not attached to who we are, but the more I know myself there, the more I accept myself there, the more I'm able to see it in the world and accept it in the world, the less power it has over me and the less judgment I have on the world. And so I really think, like, if you want to heal the world, you want to heal yourself, you really got to know and go into the shadows in an non-judgmental way. And so when I'm talking to people, that's where I want to go. I want to know the deepest, darkest aspects of themselves. And I think it's liberating. And of course, you're going to get a number of people. I mean, I'm judged all the time. How could you give Tate a platform? And just the other day, I had a workshop here in Austin. A friend was like promoting it for me. And he was like, yeah, all these guys, and they don't want to come because of the interview you did with Tate. And I was just like, okay. Like, I found that ridiculous.
I suppose
I understand it, I guess, but it's just like I don't know. I don't understand it.
It's a tricky delta between what I perceive to be honest intentions as a therapist, kind of bumping up between online culture and politics and all these kinds of things.
Yeah.
Which is why what I think, like what you're doing is interesting in a way, perhaps a little bit uncharted in that respect. But no, it's great to watch, and Well, I guess I agree with you. I'm wondering, would you say does therapy fix people? You were talking about your wife, and
No.
yeah, no. So what does it really do?
It's setting you free, bringing more awareness and consciousness to who you actually are. I think that's incredibly valuable. I mean, I don't think you can liberate yourself fully from your trauma. I think the scars are there, and I continue to have places where I'm reactive. I've done as much work as most people, or most I've done a lot of work, and it continues, and I still have my stuff. And I've realized that it's like, it's not going away. And the best thing I can do is just be humble to that, like to embrace my humanity. And that's what I try to, what I lead with. That's what I try to model for my clients and the people in my workshops is that I'm human and it's okay. And I still have blind spots, and I still act out occasionally, but I catch it a lot sooner, and it's easier for me to get humble about it or take responsibility for it.
Right.
And so, self-responsibility is really the end game, I think, for all psycho-spiritual work. Understanding that, like, you are making manifest everything in your life, and that you are not a victim, and that you were never a victim. And as long as you're blaming and judging other people for your problems, you will remain bound, a slave, essentially. And so if you're really willing to take responsibility for everything in your life and everything that you're creating and all your relationships and all the issues that you have in your career or with money, whatever it is, it's like, that's the thing that will actually set you free. That's where all the power lies. And that, hey, that's what Tate's message is, so fair enough. Like, he's all about self-responsibility. And I think that's a positive thing. And I think, therapy is approaching that not from the kind of jujitsu workout, eat healthy way. It's approaching it from, like, go deep inside, understand yourself, know yourself, and take responsibility for everything. And if you could do that, you're going to ultimately live a much more fulfilling life.
It sounds like, putting what you're saying in context, like you're coming from the school of self-responsibility and kind of owning your shit, essentially. And maybe you have awareness of something, but whether or not you act that out is down to you. I'm wondering what you feel about this other side of it, where people feel like perhaps victimized by social circumstances, or maybe somebody is in a very difficult situation which they can't control. Like, is there any space to, like, look at the systems that people live in, and try and change those, or is it all just about me, my immediate environment, and working on my own stuff?
How much control do you really have over changing the system, I think, is the issue. And are there systemic issues? I think so. I think that's real. And I can be upset and angered by them, but I think we have very little control over them. And I think the best way to change the system is to change yourself. And I think the more that you can take responsibility for the circumstances that you find yourself in, the happier you're going to be. And so, is life fair? No, life is not fair at all. And people find themselves in horrible circumstances. And perhaps it's easy for me to say, a white man born in Canada, a very, wealthy country. And, I have gifts and I've been successful, and it's easy for me to say that. But I just, from working with all my clients, it's the formula is the same, no matter your circumstances, right? If you can take responsibility for how you are responding to those circumstances, that's where your freedom lies. That's all we have. You can find nirvana in a prison cell. It's there for you if you want it. And I think human beings are a lot more powerful than they think. And I think if you actually are willing to take deep self-responsibility and to find that connection to source, to God, to your higher self, however you want to think about it, but that highest version of yourself, right? And let go of resentment and judgment and blame and anger and hatred, and really, embody what people might call Christ consciousness. I think that frequency, like, does something to your environment. It affects the people around you. And I think that, for lack of a better term, like, miracles are possible from that place. And that's what I believe. That's how my life has gone. I mean, I had a client, I just got off the phone with a client, and I've been working with him for about 6 months. And I don't know, he just, working on self-responsibility. Like, where are you creating this situation? And he's got these, without getting into details, he's got these people in his life that have been causing him a lot of frustration. And he got on the call today and he was like, you know what? It's going great with all these people. And he made the effort to stop judging them. And he took responsibility. Like, how am I contributing to this dynamic? And once he did that and then reached out, like, they were open to him and the whole dynamic changed. So I just think that that's how it works. And I think we don't understand why things are the way they are. Meaning, why, somebody born in poverty in India, is that fair? Do they have access to a better life? They're going to live their entire life in poverty and they're going to suffer. I don't know how you make meaning of that. I don't know what that's all about. But what, like, I know from my perspective in a Western culture is just like that. I think this is the best that we have right now. It's just to take responsibility. It's the individual, and you do the best with what you have.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and could talk a lot about that. But I wanted to pick up on something that you did. You pointed up and you made reference to God.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you'd be willing to talk about the role that God plays in your work.
I grew up going to Catholic school, and then went to university and was fashionably atheist, and didn't believe in spirit, and just everything was material. Sam Harris kind of vibe. And then the more I started to getting into acting, and then getting into this therapy work, I mean, there's a kind of magic that happens in the creative process. And, I didn't think of it as God, but it's not material. There's something happening, right? That's
something beyond understanding.
Yeah, something beyond understanding. And when you tap into that field, like, there's information there. And I started to realize, like, that things, like, whether it was an impulse that I had as an actor or an impulse I had as a facilitator, like, information was there. There was an intelligence that was beyond my rational mind, that was undeniable. And then I sat with ayahuasca, and that was it. As soon as I had that experience, I knew that God was real, in the sense that the experience that I had was that everything is one thing, everything is connected. I mean, it's just a classic unity consciousness experience, and that I'm not separate from anything, and that there is only one thing. There is one force, and it is intelligent, and we are all, everything here is an expression of that force. And that was as real to me. That was realer to me than anything that I'd ever experienced. And when I came out of the experience, like so many people, it's like the experience in there was more real than the quote unquote real world, which I still feel. It's like shows you what's real. It's like you see the Matrix, It's like Neo when he sees that everything is just like ones and zeros and energy. It's like he has that moment. It's like that. And so for me, that was God. And then I started doing more work with the Native Americans in the Lakota tradition, and started doing a lot of their sweat lodge and Sundance, and those, they put you in touch with something, man. You go out in the hill for 4 days, no food or water. It's like, things happen. And so I've developed a really, and you get messages, and wisdom comes through. And so, I've developed a very deep relationship with God in the sense that, not that it's an old man sitting on a cloud telling me what to do, but that there is an all-knowing force that exists, and there is a proper way to interact with that force, and that proper way is to surrender to it. Thy will be done, not my will. Thy will. And if you surrender to that force, whatever that is, you're going to find peace.
I like to pray sometimes, and the way that I argue for the utility of that is it puts me, I think, in a more logical alignment with nature. Because if I don't have a conception of a higher power or God, I find that I make myself God, and I make myself the center of reality, which I think is just profoundly stupid and not at all logical. And so by having a conception, whether that is just nature or the universe itself, is obviously something way beyond my own understanding. Even, the frequencies of light that I can't see, providing all this information that is not available to me in my rational mind because I lack the intelligence. But like you say, there is information there. So by surrendering to it through prayer, I'm somehow able to access some slither of that, hopefully in the moment. I mean, that's the humility as well that I think prayer provides. And it wouldn't be such a ubiquitous part of every single culture for as long as humanity has existed if it didn't provide us some kind of evolutionary utility. So for me, just from a purely practical point of view, it's quite a useful belief to have. And, as to the truth claims of it, what if the ayahuasca is showing some kind of unity consciousness that actually exists, or whether it's just some kind of atoms bumping together in our brains, I don't really know. But maybe that's also a necessary thing to surrender in order to, the mystery of life as it unfolds. And I really don't know what the fuck's going on 99% of the time. So
exactly. It's just a better strategy to believe in God and to pray. There's a reason that it's persisted over time.
I wanted to ask you about your experience with, did you say the Native American tribe? Because one of the critiques I am interested in about therapy is that modern therapy, from my understanding, and feel free to disagree with me on this, it exists as kind of an industry where your relationship with a client, or a therapist's relationship with a client, is the same relationship that you would have with a business and a customer. Whereas, so for example, if I was living in a tribe, maybe there was a shaman in the tribe that I would go and see, we would be interdependent in the sense that there would be a continuing relationship happening there, in the same way that, for example, if there was a priest in a church. I mean, all of these relationships have different complexities and liabilities. But if we were to pan back and look at the therapy industry, essentially you've got a bunch of vendors and a bunch of clients, customers. And so sometimes I look at things and think, like, without judging individual people, because I think that individual people are often well-intentioned, but the overall incentive structure there is not to actually make people better, whatever that means. It's to perpetuate the process, because there's money involved and money to be made. And the other thing I think that happens is that the therapeutic intervention is monetizable. So for example, if I was working with you, you could charge me whatever you charge me per hour. But as soon as that hour is over, there's no incentive for you directly. And I'm not making this as a judgment about your intentions, but there's not an incentive for you to be a custodian of my well-being or my process after that relationship ends or in between the sessions, which I think would be very different. For example, if I was counseling, somebody up the street as a pastor who I'd known their family for 10 generations. And you've been embedded in these tribes, which have these very long spiritual traditions that have these safeguards in place. I mean, they're very respectful of tradition, things like that. And sometimes it feels like we pluck these ideas out in the West, package them into a commercial product, and then marketize them, because that's what we're very good at. And I'm just curious if you have a sense of some of the externalities that might cause, and maybe you think that I'm, just making a mountain out of a molehill there.
No, I love everything you just said. I mean, how would I respond to that? I guess you're right, I would say. I've been trying to figure that out, since I started. There's a traditional way to practice that's never felt good to me exactly. And, somebody comes into your office, you're there with them for an hour and a half, whatever it is, and then they leave. And there's all kinds of different ways that people do it. I think the main thing is you have to be really clear about your boundaries and what the services you're offering. Like, if you're clear about it, and this is how I do it, and this is what it is, and then people can come into that container. And in fact, boundaries like that are important. There has to be, in some sense, a constraint, because it's not the therapy or the interventions that's the main thing. It's the relationship. Mm-hmm. The healing comes through the relationship. So in some way, what therapists are doing is they're not just pointing out people's distortions and trying to help them overcome them. They're on some level, they're reparenting. So I'm everybody's dad. Like, you come and sit with me, like I'm your dad. Right? There's just no way around that. Like, you are transferring father energy onto me, whether you're conscious of it or not.
Presuming that's somebody younger. I mean, there must be cases where that doesn't happen, or do you say that always happens?
Even yes, somebody younger, it's more obvious. It can be like, if it's if I'm working with a woman, it could potentially be lover, but you're in a role for them, certainly. But generally for me, it is father, even for an older man, because I am in a position of authority in that moment. So it's how they would experience their father. And so it's in the dynamic of the relationship that the healing happens. And so, one of the things that I was told early on that scared me is, like, you have to get into a relationship with your clients. I was like, I don't want to get in a relationship with my clients. It sounds scary. It sounds like a bird to me. Which of course was interesting. That was an interesting data point. Oh, I see relationships as burdens. I wonder where that comes from. And that was a place that I had to kind of work through. But that is what it is. You do get into relationship with them. What do we need? We need to be seen, understood, felt, acknowledged. That's all we need as children. We don't need our parents to be perfect, as long as they're there for us. And so in some sense, that's all I'm trying to do. And once I understood that, it really took the pressure off for me to say the perfect thing or have the perfect intervention or to put the pieces of the puzzle together. As long as I'm there and listening and attuned, it's great. It's all people really need.
When you are the dad to however many clients you've had,
yeah,
does that create weirdness for you?
Yeah. Well, you're in a role, you have a responsibility. There's, if you've studied counseling, I'm sure you'd spend a lot of time, or should have spent a lot of time, studying transference and countertransference. So, the transference is the projection the client has in you, and the countertransference is the projection you have in your client. And so you have to be aware of all of those things. You have to be conscious of it. They don't necessarily need to be conscious of it. They're not aware that they're projecting their their father energy onto me. They don't need to be. They're just in the process, right? But I need to be aware of that on some level. And because that transference can be both positive and negative, and but I have to hold that for them. I have to be a container, so I have to have the higher level of consciousness that can hold everything that's happening, including my own stuff that's coming up, because I might have somebody come down, sit across from me, and start talking, and maybe they remind me of my brother. And maybe I have some sadness about my relationship with my brother that I then project onto this person in a way that's not helpful, and in fact would be harmful. So it's really important for psychotherapists to always be getting supervision, to be talking about their clients, and I found that out early on, and supervision was really, really helpful for me, because there's things come up. Human beings are extremely complicated, especially when they're in the therapeutic environment. And because how do they feel? They feel threatened. They feel nervous in some way. They're scared. And so all their defenses are there, and people will unconsciously do different things to keep you away. And so they might compliment you. It's like, oh my God, you're an amazing therapist. And, if they can feel that you're susceptible to that kinds of flattery, they now have control over you. And you may not say certain things because you don't want to give up them thinking that you're good. Little things like that. And so it's such an incredibly complicated game that you're playing with people. And so it forces you to be good at it into a place of self-mastery, of real self-knowledge. And so that's one reason why I love it, because I'm constantly growing. I'm constantly being challenged. And as new clients come in, and I'm having to face myself. And I say this to, all the time. Like, I get more out of the therapy than my clients do. I don't know if that's entirely true, but it
at least as much.
Yeah, as much. It has to be that way.
Mm. So what are you susceptible to, just so I know? Flattery?
Well, what am I susceptible to? That's a good question.
Mm-hmm. Do you want me to elaborate, or you just want to run with it?
Oh, you go ahead. Oh, you can elaborate.
So, you're in this role, like the therapist, the big guy. You mentioned flattery, and I think that of all the therapists I know, myself included, although I wouldn't really call myself a therapist, but to the extent that I am, I've not met a more dysfunctional group of people in a way, perhaps because all of these things are brought to the surface in some way, or they're very live. But I just think it's interesting to think about, or to put out there, like, for me, I'm very vain about the words that come out of my mouth. I want people to think that I'm smart. I want people to think that I'm attractive. I want people to think that I'm insightful. I like to be a little bit pushy and argumentative. And these are all like liabilities for me in life, but also in the microcosm of the session as a microcosm of life itself. So I'm just curious to you, like, as you've been a therapist for a while, do you have these things that you've learned, or that you feel are your weaknesses?
Yes. It's, as an actor, I became successful, in part because I had talent, but also because I had a lot of charm. I know how to charm people. I know how to seduce. And so I have to be really careful that I'm not doing that with my clients. I'm not seducing them. I'm not trying to charm them. That I'm just being clear and direct, because I'm trying to win their favor, which may be, placating to them or complimenting them in some way. That's a trap.
But it's also a tool, right? Because
if I'm conscious of it, it's a tool. Yeah. If I'm conscious of it, it's definitely, as are all the things that you just mentioned about yourself. They're traps, but they're also tools. Right. They're very effective in this conversation. right? You're using all of those things well, and it's making for an interesting conversation. So, um,
Flattery there, I like that.
yeah. Well, it's a way to gain trust, right? And it's honest, right? Like I'm like in all these cases, like I'm saying, I have to say something that's real. I have to say something that's authentic, but you're choosing to say it in every moment. So you have to be aware of what you're saying and why you're saying in the moment. And over time, you become more skilled at it. And obviously, if you're i- i- the the need to be liked or appreciated or seen, I mean, those are the traps. Those are the traps in general, right? It's like if I need to be liked, seen, and appreciated, I'm in some way I'm diffusing my power. It goes back to what we talked about at the beginning. Like, you know, am I willing to just kind of exist here and trust that that's enough, and just ask the adequate questions. At the same time, I'm very aware that all of us are subject to persuasion. And so if you're not consciously using persuasion, like just the room, the environment that you create for your clients, how the language you use, like the things that you're wearing, like my beard, it's a thing, right? Like in that interview with Tate, it's like I made a conscious decision. I was like, I don't usually have my beard that well. I don't know. I just kind of do whatever, but it was very long, and I thought, should I trim it? And I was like, no. Like coming in looking like with a big gray beard is going to give me power, right?
Are you sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and that's a conscious decision that I'm making. It's a kind of tactic. It's a kind of manipulation.
I don't know if you're at all interested in Enneagram, but it sounds like a kind of type 3 fixation that you just
I don't know
described.
anything about Enneagram.
It's like Myers-Briggs and one of these kind of personality constellations, but people develop these different personality like archetypes based on what works for them growing up. And so type 3 is very preoccupied with success and image and just very aware of how they're perceived by others, and sort of constantly playing this game between performing and then authenticity and trying to figure out who they are underneath this presentation.
Yeah, that sounds like me.
But when I wanted to maybe take, see if it works, it may not, but take this in a bit more of a personal direction. And you were talking a lot about transference, and I didn't have much of a relationship with my dad growing up. So when I went into therapy, I had a big projection on my male therapist that I don't think has ever really gone away. Like, even though it was like 10 years ago, it's something that actually I found like very, very painful and difficult to metabolize and to integrate, because I went from having kind of a hole, essentially, psychically and emotionally, from the absence of my father, to having somebody who was very competent, heartful, and somebody who I really looked up to, but who wasn't my dad and couldn't be that role in my life. And I think that's caused me a degree of pain and maybe also shame to come out and talk about that openly. Do you ever find that, well, I don't know, do you have any
How do you feel shame about it?
I think the shame is that, like, needing a dad. Like, even as I say that, I can feel emotion coming up, because I've spent a lot of my childhood denying that I would need love from an older man or like a role model. I had uncles around. I had a stepdad for a while, but I think there was, like, on the intellectual level, like if I was to analyze it, which is different from the emotional layer, but on the intellectual level, I would have to basically rationalize it that, okay, well, I don't need this relationship. Therefore, to crave it is not going to provide me with anything at all. So I have to distance myself from it. Yeah. So
that's the defense.
Yeah.
Right. That's the adaptation that you had to make because your father wasn't there. So you had to just, okay, I don't need a dad because he's not there, because I don't want to feel how much I do need him, because if I feel I do need him, that takes me out of control. It's too painful to feel because I'm never going to get it.
Yeah. And then the shame structure seems to come around perhaps just the amount of time and the energy that has been invested in, like, all of those days growing up. I can remember now, like, say if I'd got into an argument with my mum over something, she would be the only person around because I'm also an only child. So I would really rely on that relationship to regulate myself. So if that relationship, if there was a rift created in that relationship, there would be no kind of third party to smooth things over. And it was really interesting thing that happened when I got a stepdad when I was about 8 years old, 8 till about 15. And I remember being at the dinner table, my mum, me, and my stepdad. And I'd sort of gone through this process, as you can imagine, as a kid, being very close with my mum, but also sort of having these arguments as well, and having this kind of push-pull relationship. But I really believed that she had the answers to everything. I really idolized her. And I remember she said something, and my stepdad was like, "What are you talking about? That's ridiculous." And she sort of like shrunk. And it was the first time that I think I'd ever seen an external point of view to kind of discredit her ideology. And I found it like such a healing experience. I was probably like 12 years old when it happened, but it was really the first time that I thought, okay, my mum is not God, goddess, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Well, my experience in this work as somebody who went through, a training program and countless group therapy sessions is the longing for the Father is everywhere. And, the absent Father, whether literally absent or just emotionally absent, creates a massive, massive void. And I would argue that when you look at it, society and everything that's going on, all the fights we're having about the patriarchy and men and women and feminism and all of it, it's all about that. It's all about the absent Father. And I think it's very hard to feel for those of us who didn't grow up with a father, to feel how much we actually want the Father. We long for the Father. The Father creates safety. And it's the Father's presence and consciousness that really brings order to the world. Women are amazing, but they don't do that. You don't feel safe with your mother, not in the way that you feel safe with your father. Your mother can't protect you from invaders and intruders, and it doesn't matter how strong she is or how good. Okay, maybe there's some who are really good with a gun or whatever, but
on average,
yeah, it's like you need the dad, and so and it's interesting that that we disassociate from that and we shame it, and a big part of the healing process for me and for a lot of the men and women that I work with is exactly that, reclaiming. Having, how many people have sat on on the floor of this office, lay down, and I have them reach and scream for their daddy, reach for the Father, feel that part of you that wanted your dad. And release yourself from that shame, and just and let yourself have that need, that longing met. And something happens when they do that, because the healing isn't from the healing is from the reclaiming of the impulse.
I see.
You had to deny your impulse. You had to suppress it. Of course you did, because it wasn't going to be met. It was too painful to keep reaching and him not being there. The adult can feel that longing and have it not be there, and then grieve the loss of what we needed and didn't get. And then integrate that, and then develop a healthy relationship with the masculine aspect of ourself and the masculine in others, so that we're not in conflict with it. We're not pushing it away. We're not denying that we need it. And so that is the most vulnerable thing. What you're pointing to. I needed you. Where were you? I long for you. Like when those statements come in a process, that's when the dam breaks. That's when the healing occurs. That's when the tears come, and then they collapse, and the grieving starts, to really claim and own, I needed you. And I'm sure your mom was great, but it's the story you're telling with your stepdad, who finally, I'm sure some part of you, that you enjoyed, that your stepdad kind of put your mother in her place, was because there was a part of you that knew that she was full of shit. That knew that there was at least a part of her that wasn't God. But you can't know any better.
Yeah.
Right? You can't know. You don't have the ammunition to say something, and you're not going to risk it. as a boy with that's all you got. Right. And so it goes back to that, that idea of betrayal. And I can imagine that would influence your relationship with women. I know it certainly did for me, because I grew up, in a similar situation where my dad wasn't around. I was raised by my mother, and stepdad came into the picture, but my mom was dominant. And I had to betray myself, over and over and over again to keep the connection. And that's how I learned to be in relationship with women. And so, of course, why would I want to be in a relationship with women when my whole orientation to being in a relationship with them is I have to betray myself. I have to give myself up to stay in connection with them. I have to take care of their needs and subvert my own. That made relationships just feel like a burden, and I just would be filled with resentment towards them.
Let's talk about this, if that's okay, because my sense of it, or the way that I experience that relationship with women, is a fear of, first of all, being overwhelmed emotionally, the distance being too close and being smothered, and then losing track of my own self. Like, where am I? Who am I? What do I want? Like, all that becomes very, very murky. And then my tool to create that separation is to find some flaw in them, like something very, very tokenistic, like, toenails are too long, or, I don't like the way she cooks an egg, or something. And then like create some kind of construct to reject her, and then kind of play that whole process out again, which I guess you would call an avoidant attachment style.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm wondering, to the extent that you'd be willing to open up about your own experience in this area, like how that shows up or has showed up for you in your own life.
Yeah, well, the devouring mother is it's a problem. It's an issue, and it's uncomfortable to talk about. We don't like to talk about like devouring mothers. We're happy to talk about tyrannical fathers and absent fathers, but talking about mothers who devour their children is not something we're comfortable with. And it's everywhere. Of course, if there's an absent father, there's going to be a devouring mother, and it's not to malign these mothers. It's like they have an instinct to nurture. And if there's not a man there to create the balance, they're going to overprotect, and they're going to transfer a lot of their needs onto the children. It's just a natural thing, right? If your needs aren't getting met by the man, you're going to get
Sort of
them
make
met
like
through your children.
a little husband, sort of.
Yeah, the little man, right? And that's not appropriate. But of course, the little man feels special and will play into that dynamic, and everything on the surface feels really copacetic, but underneath there's all kinds of shadow and desire for control. I mean, with my mother, her father died when she was 6, so she had this big wounding there, this absence. And then she married my father, who's an alcoholic. So he's not present. He's absent. And when she left him, when I was 6 years old, she turned her attention to me. Well, here I'm 6 years old. This is the first man in her life that she has total control over. She can do with this little man what she wants, essentially. And I have no defense against her. No, she's not. None of this is conscious. Obviously, she's not. It's not nefarious, but there's some way in which, like, all of her desire and longing for a man all gets transferred onto me, and I have to meet this need inside her. This need that from the loss of her father, the loss of my father, and now I'm carrying it all. And listen, I went to Hollywood and made a whole career out of it, playing these men, these sensitive men on female television shows. And because I was very good at it, because I've been trained perfectly. And there was a distortion out there that's what women are kind of looking for. These really sensitive men who are tuned to them and take care of them, and are comfortable with their power. So, but what happens there is you have there's a lot of rage, a tremendous amount of rage at the subversion that these and it's not just boys, it's girls as well. But let's talk about the boys that they experience. And they're going to take that out on women somehow, some way. maybe not directly, but indirectly through withdrawal, through promiscuity, through ghosting, whatever, just being a general dick, not showing up for them. And in your case, it's like, yeah, if your mother was transferring her need onto you, that need, I'm sure, overwhelmed you on some level, and that you knew, because how could you not know, that you couldn't actually meet your mother's need. So there's a place where you feel helpless. You're overwhelmed. It's too much. It's too much. I cannot meet my mother's need. It's an impossibility. I'm not a man. I'm not a grown man. Only my father can. And so I'm overwhelmed with that. And then I take that feeling of overwhelm, I project it onto all women. And then I can't get close to them, because if I get close to them, I'm going to get consumed by them. And so I find something, silly or, minor to focus on, and then I break up with them, or I push them away, or I make them bad, or I avoid the whole thing.
There's a lot of things going on there. You were saying it being overwhelming. I think the image that I feel is more like the constant nature of it, like 24 hours a day, not having any sort of breathing space. I mean, my mother's an incredible woman in so many ways. So obviously I'm just talking about this kind of small slice of things. But, in me, I can feel there's that kind of pushing away impulse, but there's also that addictive impulse as well, that I kind of need it. I need the attention. I need the validation. I need that kind of constant contact, because I feel like if I lose that, then I actually don't exist, because that's sort of how I've grown up.
Right.
So it's definitely, a big part of my life, and I can see there's obviously, as you're talking about your own career, I can see in my own life, there's been some, you want to call it, benefits to being the sensitive guy, being the guy who's very attuned to mum's moods and can read emotions and anticipate needs and all this kind of thing. But then there's also a cost to it. And I feel that cost kind of has crept up on me over the years. But it's definitely something that I can like very clearly point to and see how it sabotaged relationships and then led me to hurt people and to hurt myself ultimately. So, but at the same time, having that awareness for me it doesn't mean jack shit if I can't, as going back to earlier on in the conversation, like take responsibility for it. And I feel that's where perhaps the father piece comes in, because I can be creative and I can be fluid, but I lack my own judgment on myself. I lack a kind of structure and a discipline to really put things into boundaries, which I guess would be the more masculine parental role. And then I feel like I don't perhaps have the imprint to be able to provide that for myself. So it's this kind of like disorganization under the surface, layered on top with all sorts of like personality and compensation, so that I can go out into the world and present myself as a highly functioning person, which, I may or may not succeed at. But, that's a kind of little bit of I guess, spontaneous analysis of what I feel kind of goes underneath the surface of my emotional reality.
Yeah, and a lot of and I relate to you here, and a lot of men come to my workshops, and similar to you, and the work I have them do is really to work on their aggression, to bring out that aggressive part of them, bring out their anger, bring out their all of it, all the shadow material, all the judgment, all the rage, and the feelings that they may have toward the mother, towards women, that are not nice, right? To know themselves there, to give it voice, and then to see what's beyond that.
So when you talk a bit about these workshops, then you obviously touched on it a little bit, but how do you structure like that, something like that? You take people in. I'm assuming, I may be wrong, you have some kind of structure that you take them through that has sort of epochs or chapters, but then at the same time probably has some kind of flexibility depending on the individual who you're working with. There's some kind of witnessing component. Sounds like there's some kind of catharsis, some lying on the floor and reaching out.
All kinds of things.
Yeah. Like, do you want to?
Well, there's tools and techniques that we use, core energetics, and like a big foam block we have, and a pataka or a tennis racket, and we can hit with that, and there's mattress where we can kind of tantrum, and then we have a roller where we help kind of open up the front of the body, because we have a lot of tension and armoring across the front of the body. All kinds of different techniques and movement exercises to kind of begin to break people's armoring down physically. I mean, that's, we're working with, like, as I said, we're working with the body. So, and then, you teach concepts so that there's a framework that they understand. And then once that's, they feel safe with all of that, and they kind of understand, then yeah, we just kind of start to work with what's present, and we follow what's there. And it usually goes from one guy to another, to another, to another. And it's sometimes you're just working with one guy at a time, but sometimes the whole group is involved in different ways. It's very improvisational, and you take people as far as they can go in that moment. But ultimately, as I said earlier, like all I'm really trying to do is help people get present with whatever they're feeling. And the end game for all healing, as I said earlier, is reclaiming the impulses that we had to deny, the impulse, the longing for the Father, the reaching for love, the standing, vulnerable, open in our gifts, like just the innocence and openness of who we are, to claim back the goodness of all of that. But in order to get there, we have to go in through the layers of defense and ultimately to the pain. And so really, what am I doing with people? I'm trying to get them to feel their pain primarily, like that, because it's the pain that's going to take them to the catharsis, and then take them to be able to reclaim everything that was lost, everything that they had to suppress. And we don't want to feel our pain. It's scary to feel our pain. We do a lot of things to avoid our pain. So that's that's not how I sell people on the work, but that's what it is. To feel the pain that the child couldn't feel, and to release it, because otherwise you are walking around life avoiding all kinds of situations that might bring up that pain. And once you've felt it and realize that you can feel it, you can feel your heartbreak, you can feel your disappointment, you can feel the devastation of betrayal, that you can feel all those things and come back to wholeness, then you feel much stronger in life. Because the truth in life is, you will get your heart broken, you will be betrayed, you will be disappointed by people, because humans are fallible and you are fallible. But you can tolerate that. You can feel it and keep going. It's not going to devastate you. You're not going to be depressed for the rest of your life. And so you don't have to spend your life avoiding situations because of the feelings that it might bring up inside you.
I imagine that the people who attend these workshops are coming to you with a certain momentum of intention to want to change. I feel that's a really important ingredient in working with somebody. I mean, dipping back momentarily to that interview that you did with Tate, particularly the first one, I could sense that there was, like, somebody has to have a longing, I would say, to experience something bigger or something different in their life as a kind of engine to take them through this process of feeling their own pain. Because if you were to just bring me off the street and be like, hey, do you want to feel your pain today? There's no way I'm going to pay money to do that. There has to be some incentive, some carrot. And, these workshops, they sound pretty intense. I've been on similar ones myself. It sound like they have some of the same components, but you're just working with men, is that right?
No, I work with mixed groups, but lately I was working with a lot of men, and but I'll work with, mixed groups, men, women.
My observation from sitting in these groups is that the personality structure works kind of as layers. So there'll be a compensation, in my case, I might have an aloofness, right? An aloofness to think, okay, I'm better than people, or I'm worse than people. And that might come across in the way that I interact. But then underneath that, there's this kind of deep feeling of, I guess maybe I can't touch into it now, but I think it's just a feeling of like, I constantly have to impress people because I'm not good enough. I'm not worthy just as I am. And then underneath that, there might be a feeling of like, it's very difficult to access, but perhaps some abandonment, or some kind of responsibility that I took on too young. I don't really know. But I know that as I go through these layers with a facilitator, there's going to be some quite perhaps uncomfortable or ugly things that are going to come out as these distortions become revealed. And so I guess when I'm not an experienced therapist in the way that you are, but when I sometimes see this process happening, I get very angry or concerned for people's well-being, because I've been in very, very precarious psychological situations as a result of doing this work, coming out of these workshops and then going into like essentially potentially quite a chaotic domestic life with all sorts of things going on, and not having had the support, the integration to be able to carry on those insights into something productive in my life. The analogy I have is like creating a very delicate flower in a greenhouse. You have this container, unconditional positive regard, you've got skilled people around, you've got protection. Taking that, removing all those things, and then trying to get that flower to grow in Central Park, it's just going to get trampled. And I've definitely experienced trauma from that contrast of coming out of a very safe, skillfully held environment, becoming very vulnerable, moving into a quote unquote real world environment, and not having that same armoring that may be dysfunctional, but also protects me from the slings and arrows of real life.
Yeah. I mean, I that's a real thing. What you're talking about, and it is a concern. You have to be really, I think, mindful of how you open people up, because you're going to send them back into the world. And I don't think there's any facilitator, myself included, that hasn't made mistakes there, right? You're just following the energy, and all of a sudden, this person's opened up. And the defense is very tricky. So, the question that I would ask you is like, why didn't you do what you needed to do to protect yourself, or after the workshop? Like, were there precautions that you needed to take, like, that you didn't take? Like, is there a way that you weren't fully caring for yourself, or didn't go as slow as you needed to go, or did you share things with people that maybe you shouldn't have shared? Is there any way that you sabotaged it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
And sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Do you want to?
No, that's it. Yeah.
I mean, this comes down to just what I think is such an interesting and charged point of discussion, which is like, whose responsibility is it? Because it sounds like in this conversation, you've come down on the side of the therapist, being like, well, I'm just the therapist, I'm trying to get you to a place of personal responsibility. Whereas, I might be taking the role of the victim, being like, well, hey, like, I'm 21 years old, I've had this big opening, and now it's like, okay, bye-bye. Like, you kind of go out and live the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Like, that's a kind of difficult square to.
Yeah, no, I think both parties, I mean, ultimately, it's a really interesting needle to thread, I think, because you do want to teach people self-responsibility, right? So, for instance, I had a men's workshop a couple years ago, and two guys had been at my last workshop, and at the end of the first day, they were sitting against the wall, looking all grumpy. And I was like, what's going on, guys? I don't know. Just doesn't feel like it's got the energy of the workshop we had last time. And they're kind of complaining to me, And I said, are you guys holding back? And they were like, yeah, I guess I'm holding back. And I'm like, then it's your fucking problem. I mean, the rule here is don't hold back. That's the invitation. And you're telling me they're holding back. You're not happy with your experience. Well, then stop holding back. And they got that. Like, it's your responsibility. Like, they're waiting for daddy to come in and make it, and I'm trying to teach them, no, this is like, when you don't hold back, you can get what you want, but that's the risk that you have to take. And maybe you're scared, right? So there's situations like that where you need to challenge people, like, hey, no, this is on you. I'm not taking this on. And, you've got some 21-year-old kid, it's their first workshop. I think you got to be really mindful as a facilitator, as a therapist, and extremely sensitive and attuned to how far you're going to take them, and what you need to say to them, and what care you may need to provide for them after the fact. So it's I think it goes both ways, but ultimately, a skilled therapist has to they have to thread that needle. They have to know when's the time to challenge and when's the time to care and nurture. And I mean, you're tapping right into the heart of something that we talk about all the time, therapists, and it's really, really tricky. And I don't think anybody gets it right every time. And it's a perfect mirror for life, in that what I try to do is, if I've made a mistake or if somebody's angry at me, like you left my workshop and you're like, hey, you know what? I got all fucked up and you didn't say anything. I'd want to create the space for you to have your feelings with me, to express your disappointment, express your anger, to have your judgment, and for me to actually be able to receive that and hear that. And maybe, maybe I do need to apologize. Maybe I did make a mistake, and that in and of itself can be healing. So there's always, if the facilitator is willing to stay in the process, like stay with it, no matter what happens, there's always going to be an opportunity for repair. And in that repair, there's an opportunity for healing and change.
One of the things I find amusing, and I have judgment about, and I've told you this kind of anecdote, and the mind is so tricky. It creates all these kinds of rationalizations, and it's this person's fault, and it's a way for me not to take responsibility, but at the same time there is some kind of truth in it. And I feel like spiritual, quote unquote, people, they have all of these like little stones that they can hide behind, and ways to defer responsibility onto each other. It's like, oh, this is my truth, this is your truth.
Yeah.
I'm going to abdicate responsibility. And the whole language of therapy, I think, is really fraught with this kind of thing. I mean, imagine if I went to a boat trip and there was a hole in the boat and I fell in the water and I drowned, then I'd be like, well, hey man, that's your process. Like, it's just a sort of weird space in.
Yeah. It's
But I get your position.
Yeah, there's no way out of it, really. I mean, yeah, because therapists are not perfect people.
And clients will blame you as well. Clients will scapegoat you. They will blame you.
Well, that's the problem, like, of course they will, right? And that happens. There's, lots of people who go from therapist to therapist, workshop to workshop, and who blame and judge the facilitators as they go, and that's just their MO, and that's how they're avoiding things. It's really, really tricky. That's why, when I do particularly mixed workshops, it's like, we have a pretty stringent interview process to make sure that the people coming in are prepared, because the work that we do is pretty intense. And it does open up a lot. So we have to be, it's not for everybody. And we have to be really mindful about who we let in, and do they have the enough of an ego structure to actually handle the work and be able to integrate it in their lives. And so that's the way, that's what I've learned over time, is the best way to go about it, to take responsibility, is to do it up front.
Yeah, I mean, I do get the sense, and part of the reason why I wanted to speak with you personally is I do get a feeling, again, it might just be in my imagination, but I hope it's not, that you have a sense of integrity and responsibility about what you do, which is not something, to be honest, that I actually see all the time. I'm sure you realize this as well from people that you've worked with and people that you've seen in the space. But there's a whole piece that happens, I think, on the other side of that, when the door to the therapy office closes and that person is in their life, that is momentum is carried on from that interaction that is not.
I think I do have integrity. I don't think about it like, oh, I want to have integrity.
No.
I just really like the work. Like, it's fascinating to me, and so I'm just engaged in it, and I'm trying to find the truth. And I think it's like it's almost like an innocence to that. Like, it's kind of simple and it's pure, and I'm not turning into something esoteric. It's just like, oh, we're just gonna have a conversation. We're gonna try to find out what's true, and I like that. And so when you take the demand off everything, and you're just there in the moment with somebody. It's only one time that I've had, in my practicing, where I had somebody really, really complain, like walk out of a workshop and write me a letter and you're a fraud and all this stuff. And it surprised me because I didn't see it. Once it happened,
You didn't see it coming in the moment?
I did not see it coming. I missed it.
Huh.
I had to really ask myself, like, how did I miss that? Like, how did I miss that this person wasn't prepared, ready for the environment that I was creating? Like that they weren't strong enough to manage it, right? I missed it. I didn't see. I don't know why. I know why now. But I can't really say, but yeah, I had a blind spot and it bit me in the ass. And you know what? But in the end, what I want to say is I got what I needed and he got what he needed. Like, there was a kind of, like, I stayed in it. I didn't, make him bad or didn't make myself bad. I was like, okay, this happened. I tried to do the best that I could in the situation and show up in the
You said he wasn't strong enough. That makes it sound like it was his responsibility.
No, it was my responsibility, 100% my responsibility, because I did not recognize that. I should have recognized that and approached him in a different way, or not allowed him to be part of it. And I didn't see it for, again, reasons that it's sort of not, in terms of confidentiality, I don't want to get into, but, and so I made a mistake. Again, no harm, no foul. I don't think any real harm was done. And I think we both got, in some sense, what we needed. So there's always, there's always the opportunity for growth and healing in every dynamic. And so, and it was uncomfortable, and I wanted to blame him. I wanted to be like, what the fuck's your problem, dude? I'm awesome. The other guys didn't have a fucking problem. Nobody else had a problem, Well,
there's some truth in that. I'm just trying to.
Yeah.
Maybe not. I don't know.
No. I mean, at the end of the day, that's on me. Like, I have to take responsibility for that. I have to take 100% responsibility that I made the mistake, that there was something to see that I didn't see. And I know why I didn't see it. Like, I see now why I didn't see it. And that I made a mistake. I got, I fooled myself. I didn't spend enough time looking at this thing, and it was somewhere in my consciousness. The signal was there. I just didn't pay attention to it for reasons. And, so but it's great. I learned something about myself in that moment. And I needed that lesson.
Sounds very humbling.
It was very humbling. It was scary.
It
was scary. in the moment.
I see we're coming up on a couple of hours, and I want to respect your time. I'm just maybe to wrap up. Like, it would be interesting for me to really just zoom out. We're talking in 2024, and if we think back to therapy in the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, this image of like the middle class housewife being analyzed on the couch, which seems very antiquated now, and Prozac and these sorts of things. And we have, this, what we've talked about, like inside the sausage factory of the therapeutic process, which I've really enjoyed. But if we were to go forward into the future another 50 years, what are people going to look at that we're doing now that they're going to find antiquated? They're going to think, I can't believe that therapists in 2024 thought that this was the way to work with people.
Drugs.
Go on.
I think all the medication is.
Oh, I see. You're talking about
medication,
pharmaceuticals. You're not talking about psychedelics.
Yeah. No, I think the psychedelics are powerful. They can be a powerful tool. So I don't know about all of them, but the ones that I've experienced, I think can be useful when used intentionally. They're not always used intentionally. That's the problem. It's a great question. I think that I don't really consider myself a therapist anymore. And really what I do is shamanism. I don't obviously call myself a shaman, but when I think about how I approach things, it's very much aligned with like the shamanistic approach. And I think that's why I was so attracted to the plant medicine, ayahuasca in particular, and why the Shipibo tradition, which is a very intense way to sit with ayahuasca, and then the Native American, there's a really shamanistic elements to all of it that are not mind oriented, right? They're really working with spirits and energy, and so I think that it's going to go more that way. I think that psychotherapy is powerful, but I don't think if you're not getting in shaking, when I think of shamanism, it's like you got to shake it out. You gotta have the experience. You have to have the catharsis. You have to have the release. I think if you're not doing that, you're not really having the full experience. And I understand from the outside looking in, it can look ridiculous, it can look silly, and you see these videos that people post and then everybody makes fun of them. And in some cases they deserve to be made fun of because people don't really know what they're doing. I mean, I'm not like, my work is it's not just primal screaming. It's like when somebody goes up and hits the block, I'm like, it's very intentional. Like I don't let them hit if they're not present. Like you have to be present in the experience of what you're doing, whatever it is you're doing, in order for it to be effective. So I don't let people just scream and yell and disassociate. Right. And a lot of people do that and think that that's healing and cathartic. It's not. It doesn't work. It doesn't do anything. The person
can be even re-traumatizing.
Yeah, they're not there. You have to be here. Like it's for me to experience my anger. Like it has to be. Everything's relational. It's one thing for me to like close my eyes and scream, fuck you. It's another thing to look at you in relationship and scream, fuck you. It's a different vibe.
So that's just
it's different. And that's what I'm trying to help people master. It's in relationship to the self, but to others, because that's how we live, right? So I think just in my experience, it's like, I think the work that I'm doing, to be honest, is the most effective work that there is. I'm not saying the way that I practice it, or there's not other things that are also equally as effective, but I think the somatic approach, whether it's deeply cathartic the way I practice it, or whether it's more subtle, because again, from some other people, the way they're structured, it needs to be done in a much more subtle way.
Sure.
I think the breath work is important. But I think, yeah, the more shamanism, less psychiatry.
Well, David Sutcliffe, thank you so much. Really enjoyed talking.
Appreciate you, man. I enjoyed the conversation.